Heather Staff, thank you very much for talking to me again. The Voice of the Agent survey has got some really sort of interesting demographic answers in there in terms of the survey that they've done and sort of analyzing where we are up to as an industry in terms of equality and to throw in other buzzwords, diversity. The general feeling is that although we're making all the right efforts to try and be a little bit more diverse and encourage diversity, we still are predominantly really falling short of the mark when it comes to having a diverse makeup. So just look around the room at every conference, at an average award ceremony, and it's usually the same type of people without wishing to be unkind to anybody. You guys at Street have deliberately fostered a culture that is, very diverse. If anybody's ever visited your offices and met your staff body, it really is a very diverse team, and you seem to embrace different sort of cultures and different backgrounds. That has to be a conscious decision in terms of how you run a company. I guess the question I'm trying to ask you is, how do people achieve diversity, and does it need to be affirmative action almost in terms of this is the way we set up the company, this is what we're looking to achieve?
It's a really good question, and you do have to be deliberate about it, but I think you need to be deliberate about it for the right reasons. Because I think when people think, oh, I need to have a diverse workforce to tick that box, or it's something I should do, I just don't think that's you're ever going to foster a really diverse culture or diverse workforce if you're just doing it to tick a box. I think the first stage is why should you have a diverse culture? And there's lots of like moral reasons, but putting those to one side, there should be commercial reasons for any business to want diversity across their workforce. So there was a McKinsey study done. I think I've got it in a book here somewhere, but that basically it categorized the diversity of senior leadership teams across a really wide range of organizations, and it categorized them into quartiles. And the ones in the top quartile for diversity versus the ones in the bottom quartile outperformed these guys. Investors in more gender diverse companies reaped an extra 3.5% compound annual growth rate in their returns versus their less diverse counterparts. And MSCI, an investment services firm, examined US companies with at least 3 women on their boards and found that they had 10% gains in return on equity and 37% gains in earnings per share, while those with no female directors had declines in both measures over a 5-year period.
So those are substantial figures, aren't they? That prove that sort of level of diversity and inclusion, it works commercially.
100%. And so, if nothing more, having a diverse board, having a diverse SLT, having a diverse team, full stop, will get you better results as a business. And I think a big reason for that is diversity of thought in general is really, really important. It's really useful. And there's a really good book actually called Rebel Ideas, and he talks about that. Have you heard of that one?
Yeah, I have heard of that.
Yeah. And he gives an example in that book where they asked people to look at a scene, and it was some fish swimming in the sea, and they were all Americans, and then said, right, describe the scene, and then they would describe all the fish and the different colors. And then they got some Japanese people to watch exactly the same scene and describe the scene, and they, because of cultural differences, it was all like the setting, so the sea and what was around the fish. And they both looked at exactly the same thing, but culturally there were massive differences. They saw different things. And I think that's a really good sort of analogy for why you should want a diverse team, because people see different things. They come from different backgrounds. They understand the customer. I mean, estate agents deal with the entire breadth of the population.
Well, I was going to say, so I mean, you and I go back a way, and we're sort of from, roughly speaking, the same corner of the world. And I have spent my professional career predominantly dealing with a particular ethnic minority, put it that way, in a corner of North Manchester, just because of my background. So I appreciate as well, though, that audience that I used to talk to was tremendously diverse from all different sort of faiths and backgrounds and so on. And I know that's very similar to sort of the areas that you grew up in and the sort of schools that you went to and the people that you met along the way. And the point is that the communities that we as agents across the country, and you don't need to live in the North Manchester Bagel Belt to talk about this, but across the breadth of the country, you've got diverse communities, and every single town, every single city has got different people contributing to this rich sort of tapestry of life there. But the point is, have we got agents that reflect the diversity of the communities that they're serving? And sometimes when I look around those rooms at in Mayfair in those big conferences, and I think, where are they? Like where is it? And it feels sometimes that we're not really managing to get there.
No, I don't. I'm sure there's a ton of reasons why that is, but one of the ones that really fascinates me is the gender diversity in a state agency,
Yeah.
because again, I can't remember the exact number, but I think it's something like 70% of purchasing decisions with services as well as products are made by women. So if you as an estate agent are sat in a room with a couple, the chances are it's going to be the woman who is going to choose which estate agent
Yeah.
they choose. And again, natural human psychology, we often relate to people who remind us more of about ourselves. So again, I don't even know if these stats exist, but I'd be fascinated to know conversion rates for female valuers, whether estate agents with more females do better in terms of market share. I would love to know that, because I think it's an interesting point that they might find it easier to relate to the person that's actually making the decision.
I think so. In fact, I know of an agency in particular that will try and sort of pick it, if you like, the valuer that they send out to meet the people at the property based on the sort of demographic background of the people that they're meeting. They try and sort of match it up because they appreciate, yes, that some people respond to a certain type of person slightly better, but again, you need to have all of these people under your umbrella in order to sort of make it work in terms of diversity and gender diversity as well, if you like, in terms of getting the right people out there. And I just wonder, is there a sense for you that attending things like the Women in Estate Agency conference and the sort of surveys that are being done, but also the level of discussion that's going on within the industry at the moment, it feels like for the first time that we're having more difficult conversations, and I think there's a willingness amongst people to change.
Yeah, and this year's Women in Estate Agency conference was the first one that I'd went to, and I didn't have any preconceived notions of what it was going to be like or anything like that. And I saw and heard plenty of comments about, oh, is it just women and blah blah blah. And I have to say to those people who you might have doubts about, why do we have a conference? Is it just for women? Well, first of all, it's definitely not for women. And I think until there is equality across the industry, then something like that probably is needed. But it's for everyone. And I think it highlights some of the challenges that women face in the industry. And I thought it was just a very, very good event. And I think the board or committee need some real recognition for what they actually managed to pull off with that event, because it was excellent.
Yeah, no, I think it is. I think it's absolutely superb. I mean, I've been involved with it for sort of this. That was my second year. The first year was pretty amazing, and I think it's lovely to sort of walk away from a room like that with people genuinely kind of enthused, and they have like a collection of different ideas that maybe challenge their preconceived notions about how things are as well.
Mhm.
There's a sense though that we only get to, because of the short time that we can spend on things like that, we only really get to sort of scratch the surface, and there's much more deeper work that needs to be done. And in that vein, in terms of your culture in your office and the sort of things that you've done, do you think there's positive steps that people can take within their businesses in order to deliberately foster a culture of diversity?
Yeah, so we've done some pretty easy stuff, to be honest, to make sure that we recruit from as diverse a pool as possible, and also we do things like, for example, all the CVs that come through to Street Group are anonymized by the tech that we use. So you can't see the name, it will come through as like Blue Dinosaur. So you've got no idea. So CVs themselves, as a starting point, are reviewed on the merits of the CV and the experience alone, which there's tons of studies to show that if you don't do that, subconscious bias will creep in. And, just take that one away. That's an easy one. In our interview process, we do 2 separate interviews. Well, we do 3, but at each one of those interviews, the people who interviewed in the previous round are not allowed to speak to the people who then interview in the next round, so that there can be no passing of any bias. So there's certain things that you can do there which will stop any subconscious bias creeping in that might happen. We do other things, like we sponsor a program called Tech Returners, which obviously half of our company, over 60 people, are software developers.
Yeah.
And it's diversity is a real challenge with software engineers. It's predominantly men, I think, across the entire software engineer population. I think it's something like
So it's not just a stereotype of men in very dark rooms staying up all night on high calorie drinks, trying to sort of code as much as possible. That's not what we see on the films, right?
No. And I think I could do a whole separate chat about why is that and why is it become very male dominated, but I'll park that. But one of the things that we do is sponsor a program called Tech Returners, which basically is really clever. It gets people who've had a career break out of tech. And in tech, because tech moves really quickly, there are new technologies, there are new this, that. When you've had a career break for whatever reason, let's say you've been out of the workforce for a couple of years, 3 years, whatever, it's extremely daunting and also extremely difficult to get back into being a software engineer. So no surprises, but a lot of those people who have career breaks are people who've had a baby, and that disproportionately impacts women, and then they drop out. And then you lose the few female engineers who've come through, then drop out of the workforce, which is criminal. So Tech Returners sponsor them, do an intense course for, I think it's 6 to 8 weeks, where they're like this, teach them all the new tech, get them up to speed. And then companies like us that sponsor that course then interview them, and then they can come and join our companies, so they feel confident when they come back to work.
That's fantastic. That's fantastic.
So we do take a lot of positive action, I would say, to make sure that we do have a diverse workforce.
That's really great, because I suppose there is that sort of anxiety, isn't it? When people sort of have to take time off work for sort of parental leave and so on. Coming back is a really difficult stage, reintegrating into those processes, and sort of, very often their work has been distributed to other people during the time that they've been off, and it's hard for them to kind of get back to where they, if you talk to people, that's what they'll say, it was never the same afterwards. That has to be a really conscious decision to make that landing as easy as possible, right?
Yeah, and I obviously that's engineers, but as a side point, I was chatting to somebody recently who was the employer of one of my friends, and they were saying, well, what should we do on maternity leave? She said she wants to dial into, the all hands or whatever. And I was like, well, let her dial into the all hands. You don't need to say, no, you shouldn't do that. You're on maternity leave. Because I think the longer that gap where you feel out of the loop, the harder it is to go back. So if somebody wants to keep informed, let them. If they don't, let them. But I think, supporting what people want to do and making it not as daunting to come back.
But don't ignore it. You have to sort of really consciously address it with them and ask them what they want and what they need, really, to support them on that journey back in.
Yeah, I think it's really difficult, particularly like as a woman. When I was pregnant, the number of comments that I got around, I hope you're not one of these women that doesn't take maternity leave, or the polar opposite, I hope you're not going to take too much time off. The comments that fly in, and you start thinking, oh my God, I'm going to get judged here. Whatever I do, I'm going to get judged. And I don't think men on the whole have to deal with that as much. And the one thing
I don't think so.
No, and like my husband never got any comments like that. And I think if there's one big thing that would massively help equality and diversity in general, is encouraging men to take parental leave. And it's becoming more and more popular, and more men are doing it. But typically, it's more professional men. So the higher the earner, higher the male earner, the more likely they are to do it. And we need to get men to feel confident enough to do that, full stop, whatever the role.
Oh, I agree, and I hear just in casual conversation when men are talking about sort of taking that parental leave at the beginning, it's almost like, oh, I've been forced into doing it, or have you been forced into doing it? It's like it's not something that they'd necessarily want to do, but actually there's a great number of men, and not just sort of modern enlightened men, but I think in general, who feel that they weren't able to be around enough at the beginning of a very important stage in their family's life, to be
Yeah.
honest. And I think they've got as much to gain from it as the women do. Creating that bond in those early days is important.
You know, men who take longer, I think it's 3 months of parental leave, have better bonds with their children, have lower divorce rates, and their wives will earn more money. So it's like, you know, there's every reason to take it, but I think a lot of men feel that they would be judged by other men, and I think it's
Yeah.
like it's a weakness of those men.
Oh, I know, I agree, and I think that this is why, like, I love the level of conversation that we're getting to within the industry, and I love the fact that you've got things like PropX, you've got things like Women in the State Agency Conference, where the focus isn't necessarily on just how much you've achieved and where you've got to and how many awards you've got and all that sort of, the normal KPIs and metrics that we judge each other by. But it's more, we're getting into sort of the soul of things and how people function and the things that they're struggling with. And in some ways, it's a shame that there aren't enough as many men in the room as there were women that day, because I feel that we have a lot of catching up to do. And there's so much that we kind of learn from these discussions. We've got to be willing to change, but I think that we very often need to be dragged kicking and screaming to realize that actually there's a lot of benefit here. And you've touched on this earlier in our conversation, but there is evidence out there that supports the fact that commercially we have everything to gain and very little to lose in terms of addressing these things.
Yeah, we do. So if you're not doing it for any other reason, just do it to run a more successful business. With a happier culture, people will stay longer. You have less recruitment costs. People are generally just happier, and yeah, you don't want a room full of exactly the same type of person. I mean, how boring.
Thank you so much for your time. It's been lovely chatting to you again. I know you're very busy. I'll let you get on.
Lovely chatting to you, David. And yeah, I'll speak to you soon.